All right, so we got another video here that's supposed to help you with the lesson 6 vocab, exploring the 4 empires of Mesopotamia. And when we look at this unit, we're looking at what were the most important achievements of the Mesopotamian empires, right? So understanding the word empire and understanding like how an economy works are very important for this lesson. So let's start with an empire. Hopefully you've heard this term before, but most people don't really have a good understanding of what it means. So it's a large territory in which several groups of people are ruled by a single leader or government. So typically, the people that are in charge do not live near the people that they are in charge of. And I'll explain more about that in a sentence or in a second. So when you look at the sentence, right, even though Egypt was far away in Africa, it was part of the empire of the United States. So whether you know this or not, but Egypt used to be under the control of the United Kingdom, which was an island nation outside of Europe. Now, Egypt is in Africa. It's thousands of miles away, but Egypt was part of the United Kingdom's empire. So they were still part of the United Kingdom's government. If you went to Egypt, you would have seen the United Kingdom's flag. So that's what makes it part of the empire, right? And this visual in the upper right, it's kind of tough to see. It's on the next page as well, but it talks about the Spanish Empire. And when you zoom in or when you pause, you'll see that everything in green on this map was controlled by Spain. Now, if you follow my arrow, Spain is just this very small piece of land right here, just above Africa, yet all of this green is spread out across the world. Well, that's what made it an empire, is that Spain was in control of all of these things. They traveled to these places, conquered the people that lived there, and decided how they were going to live. Okay, so some examples of this, right? The Spanish Empire, the United Kingdom. We're going to be studying these Mesopotamian empires. Some people say the United States is, because if you look at, it's a little bit different, but Puerto Rico, for example, is in control or controlled by the United States. Hawaii used to not be a state, but was controlled by the United States. Alaska is somewhat new to the United States. So it's a different area that's still under the control of the United States. And I also put as an example the Renton School District. So there's a building down in downtown Renton that controls, it's like where all the people who control Renton School District work. And they're in charge of like 50 schools, yet, they're all not in one spot. So they have to travel all around Renton and Seattle to get to those schools, but they're still in charge of all of them. They still all are Renton School District schools. So some non-examples, Dimmitt is not an empire. It's just us, we're all in the same building, and the Seattle Seahawks. So again, if you look at this slide a little bit closer, you can see that what is in green right there in Spain, that's where Spain was located, but they were in charge of the Incas in Peru. They were not the Incas in Peru. They were in charge of some nations in West Africa. They were in charge of the Incas in Peru and the Mayans in like what is now Mexico. So at one point, they controlled a huge amount of land across the world, yet Spain was just this part right here. So that's what makes it an empire. An economy, this one's kind of tricky, but it's the way that a region or a country or a group of people uses the resources around them to produce and sell or trade goods to meet people's needs. That's a very long definition. It's really hard to understand. But when you think about it, it's just people using whatever is near them. So if you had a lot of fish near you, or if you had a lot of like farming or food to sell, that's what would drive your economy. So let's take the example of fishing, because I have that in my sentence. The economy of ancient Egypt is largely based on fishing, since people fish, sell the fish, and buy the fish. That's what makes it an economy, is that someone has to like find the resource, someone sells the resource, and somebody buys it. So it's this system that keeps on moving. So people will keep finding the fish as long as there are people that will sell the fish, and people will keep selling the fish as long as there are people that will buy it. And the system just keeps moving on and on. Now, this is just one part of the economy. Whoever buys that fish probably has to have some other job, and it just keeps going on. And they're using whatever money they make from that other job to buy fish. And whoever is in the fisherman, right, whoever is selling the fish or making the fish and making money off of it, they're probably using that money to buy other things that other people sell. So it's this huge system where people are buying and selling goods to get what they need and what they want. I have a visual that just kind of shows a bar graph and money. It's basically just saying that like the economy is revolved around resources. This can be as simple as trading food at lunch, and the currency would be whatever you have in your lunchbox. Monopoly, because you start to get money and you acquire money by selling goods, and in this case, houses, right? A market, like if you go to a farmer's market, that's a form of an economy. A shopping mall. My wallet is not an example. A computer is not an example, and bingo is not an example. So lastly, before we wrap up, this image really helps, but you can see that in the center of our economy is what people use to buy things. So in our economy, in the United States, we use dollars, right? And sometimes that's a debit card, cash, or a check, but that's what gets us the things that we want. Now, we could use that money to buy a construction site or have someone fix our house. We could use that money to buy a house. We could use that money for a doctor. We could use that money for a teacher. But wherever that money goes, it ends up going someplace else as well. So if you hire a construction worker, right, the construction worker is taking the money that you paid them, and they're probably going to buy a house for themselves. Now, eventually, somebody in that house might get sick, and they'll need to give money to a doctor. Well, the doctor is probably going to need to use that money that they got to buy their own house. And they might actually buy, some extra tutoring on the side. And a doctor might also need a construction worker. So this diagram just shows that the money moves in all these different directions so that people can have different goods and services. And it all comes back to people having different jobs. If people all had the same job, this whole system would not work. So again, we look at empire and economy. These are the two most important terms that you need to have. And if you feel uncomfortable with it or you're unsure, go ahead and raise your hand and I can answer your questions, or just watch the video again.